Hello, everyone, and welcome to Human SOS Show, episode 143. Look forward to a time of good conversation about a current topic. I hope that as you join us, that you will be sure and uh, uh, tell us where you're joining from. And of course, we always love to hear your comments and your questions along the way because that helps make this much more interesting. So, Anton, if you would open up our topic for today.
Good morning, everybody. And as Kevin said, thank you so much for joining. We always appreciate your time and effort into helping grow the Human SOS movement. As a reminder, Human SOS stands for Human Sustainability Operating System or Humanly Sustainable Operating System. And what we're trying to do is create a place where organizations and people can stop to overuse their internal resources, basically where imagine by noon we're using what we should be using in 24-hour period, and that's really how we are run from a physical standpoint, from mental standpoint, all around ourselves. This is what's happening, and Kevin and I and our audience and our followers are trying to change that and trying to get the society to wake up and be better within that spectrum, because we didn't do that necessarily with our planet. It took us a really long time to find sustainability within our planet. Well, now we want to do that, or not we want to repeat that mistake within ourselves. And one of those things is just the state of how we are, right? Who we are as human beings is one thing, how we are is another thing. And I think how we are and who we are tied behind what our core values are, right? What we believe in, what has been set, and I call it what's set in stone, because our core values don't really move that much, right? I think over years maybe some will shift, but it's not something that's changing day by day, month by month. It's a fine tune versus a massive adjustment. So, Kev, before we really get into setting core values and things like that, I'd love to ask you, what are some big mistakes that you see from people not setting their values or setting them improperly? What's some of those things that you see as a leadership coach and developer?
Well, real quick, welcome, Karen. Glad to have you with us as always. Uh, One is that we just don't even take the time to consider what are our core values. A lot of people never take that time. They kind of assume it or they don't think it's important. And as a result of not having those core values understood, established, first of all, it creates potential conflict in our relationships. Because if we go into a relationship where there's a conflict of core values, then that's a real problem. The other is, as a leader, if we don't know our core values, we can't express them to others. And it's not that we're going to try to make others adapt our core values, but they need to understand them from a function standpoint, the ability to work together and do so without uh, violating or challenging people's core values. Now, obviously, if you're going to be working together on a team long term, it's better if you have some shared core values because otherwise you've got built in conflict about priorities, about decisions, and so on. But one of the big mistakes is just never taking the time to consider what are those essential core values, those things that I won't negotiate, I won't give up, and that they stay with us because once we get those established, that becomes an anchor for us in everything else we do. And the better we can clarify, the better we're going to be able to and communicate, the better we're going to be able to function with people because you at least have a common understanding of what you won't give up, what you won't give in on. So that's a few of the things I observed. Welcome, Ahmad. Glad to have you with us.
Oh, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that sometimes people go and don't take enough time, right? They maybe try to establish them, but they don't regularly check in, right? It's maybe something where they went through an exercise and somebody came in and a leadership coach or some sort of workshop happened, or they read a book. They went out and set these values. The problem is that they're not regularly checking in with them. They're not, applying them on a regular basis across their work, across their life, and they don't become set, right? They become something that's on a piece of paper, but it's not in their heart, it's not in their mind. Because I think that setting core values is not an easy practice. And it's, in the beginning, it is iterative, right? It's going to take you time to get to where, like, okay, this is really what I stand for. This is really who I am. This is really how I am. Because if we just wrote it on paper and don't put it into practice, we won't memorialize it in our heads and our hearts. And then when things come up and it becomes inconvenient to execute on that core value, it becomes very easy to walk away. But if within our hearts, within our minds, and it's really engraved in there, it's going to be much harder to walk away, or much harder to walk away from the core value, and easier to walk away from the thing that's challenging that core value.
Yeah, and Karen makes a comment, and that is that absolutely align the core values among team players. It's a part that has to be there, and you have to truly identify those core values and have the team members do the same. It's not about us necessarily establishing our core values and say, well, everybody else has got to do this. It's an exercise that needs to happen for each person so that they have that understanding for themselves, like you said, so they don't walk away from it when situations are challenging or whatever. But then once you bring a team together, you have them share their core values, and the goal would be to find common ground and establish team values.
Yeah, it's interesting. When we talk about teams, we got to look at self-managed teams and not self-managed teams. You have and then the way that you approach setting core values with those teams is going to be different. Because if a team is self-managed and you try to do top-down approach to core values, it's not going to work. They're going to push against it. They're going to, maybe complete the exercise, whatever it is that we're doing, but they're not going to embody those on a regular basis because they're not going to feel like they own it. Now, on the other hand, the not self-managed team, you try to put together core values for them, or they try to put together core values themselves without any assistance from the top. They may not come up with good ones because they don't know how, they don't know the process. So there may need to be some general idea coming from the top, from higher level leadership of what the company stands behind. But then even a not self-managed team still needs to interpret what it means for them, right? What does that look like in day-to-day behaviors for them? What does that look like in day-to-day decisions for them? But either way, they have to make it real in what frontline team member has to do and has to think and has to, execute in order for those core values to be real.
Welcome, Jeremy. Always glad to have you with us there, brother. I appreciate you being here. And it's really interesting that sometimes when we start thinking about core values, we want to, rather than come up with those values, we want to make it about a set of operating rules. And that's a byproduct, but at the end of the day, that's not the same. And I would suggest that if we really dig into core values, that we really consider that we need to not make that a big list. We need to pick those essential things that we just will not negotiate on and establish those. And rather than making this laundry list of, well, I don't do this and I only do that and that kind of thing, a different thought and approach involved in what core values are. And it needs to be very thoughtful because at the end of the day, those core values may force you to make a decision that's tough. If you've got a company that is trying to establish a new value as a company and it contradicts and violates one of your core values, that may be a time where you have to go, okay, I need to rethink this job, and because it's going to create some real conflict. It'll affect productivity. These core values factor into a lot of what we do and how we behave and function in a lot of environments, and sometimes we don't consider them. And as a result, you were asking about what happens if we don't have core values, is that it creates conflict within us because we start getting asked to do things, and then we go, okay, is this something that I do or don't do? And it better to have that established in the beginning so that you can be clear on that. An example, I coached a young man that was looking at getting a job, and he went to the company website and looked at their core values and what was priority. And going in, he realized that one of the core values they had established would create conflict for him in that if he were employed by that company. And fortunately, he considered, although the job would have been nice, that he needed to not take that job and walk into trouble from the beginning. And so taking the time to really think through those core values and establish them for ourselves is real critical.
I think we have a question.
Well, welcome, Sharon and Z. Glad to have you. Appreciate you being here. Mod has a question. How can we identify what our core values are when some teammates don't find it purposeful enough? Anton, you want to tackle that one?
Sure. And this comes back to results pyramid. Anytime I'm trying to do anything of this nature, we want to set core values. And I see leaders do this all the time. It's not working, so they try a different way to set core values, or they try different values. The problem is not the values, it's the beliefs and the experiences that lie underneath those values. So if somebody doesn't think it's purposeful enough, we have to recreate an experience, right? So results pyramid, you have experience at the bottom that leads into a belief, that leads into an action, and that action leads into a result. So if you're looking at action of core values and those values being set, aligned, and acted upon on a regular basis, we can't just work on those values all the time. We have to go back and change the belief around it, which is what you're saying the roadblock is. But if to do that, we have to create that experience. So as an example, I had a team one time that didn't do a good job. Like, this is not my team. This is a team that I knew of, and I knew the leader, and they weren't doing a good job. They were having a hard time setting values. And what it was about taking care of the customer, right? Putting customer first and really putting their needs first. It was in the hospitality space. And what the leader did is he took the team and took a limo out, took a night in, I think it was the Ritz-Carlton, super nice hotel. And he created the experience of what it feels like to be on the other end of that core value when it's executed properly. Those people had an absolute amazing time. Their eyes were opened, and they experienced what it feels like to do that, to be that way. And all of a sudden, they embodied that core value because they now believed how important it was, because they got to receive it on the other end, right? So instead of forcing things on people, we have how do I get them to have the right kind of experience? Now, sometimes you can't recreate an experience, and sometimes an experience has to be done through a story. You have to be a really good storyteller and be able to pull people along, not push them there, right? So it's one thing to say, here's the core values and go, and here's another thing of we're gonna slowly pull you along through examples, through stories, whatever it may be. So that's kind of the starting point, right? And then how to create core values, it just depends, right? You can sit down, like I was saying, you have either a self-managed team or a not self-managed team. If the teams have been together for a while and they're doing well, and you just want to really escalate that performance, increase their performance, you want to get together and do almost like affinity clusters, right? Get together and have break out in different groups and have everybody write down what are some of the most important things to them. And then have them summarize all those things into smaller groups and put them all over a board on sticky notes. And then come together as a large group and start to take all those sticky notes, and again, as a group, put them into smaller groups yet again. So that way, like Kevin says, you don't end up with 10, 15 different things. You're maybe getting down to 5, right? Something of that nature. And then together, because you see that even though my core value is not written in exact words, I see that it had input into what that core value ended up being. Now, as a person, I have ownership of that because I feel like I played a role in the development. It's something something that I care about. And then you group those things together. So now the opposite is what I was saying. If it's not a self-managed team, you're going to have a hard time doing that with a group of people that are not working well together, right? So that's when maybe somebody like Kevin or myself come in and we sit down with the leadership team or somebody else, whatever, right? And the leadership team does that exercise because they need to be better, and you can facilitate it and you can go through exercises to get there. And then the leadership team passes those down to the front line, but the front line still plays a role because the core values are kind of set, but now we're going to still play a role in how we execute it every day. And and how we do it on every single, every single interaction, every single engagement, whatever it may be. And it still comes to life and still becomes partly of their ownership because they defined it. They may not have had the word, set by themselves, but they still define the meaning to them and to their team, because to each team, that value may show up a little bit different. So that'd be my take.
Well, and just to go a little simpler, most of us, if we got to take time and be aware, but most of us find that we react to situations in life in certain ways that indicate where our values are. If we are uh, watching a movie and somebody behaves a certain way in a movie, if we find ourselves in response to that, getting emotionally either angry or upset, or we're identifying with it, that is a way that kind of indicates to us what our core values are, is how we react to life situations. And so if you go and start being aware of those reactions, both in the past and currently, you begin to get a feel for what is essential to you, because we react. I mean, we have an internal um, compass. And when we react to situations, it's based on that internal compass. Well, that internal compass is really the indicator of our core values. What is really important to us? And so, as we begin to be aware and do that, we can consider what our core values are and then begin to figure out how to get them recorded, get them down so that we can understand them more clearly and be able to communicate them clearly. So yeah, there's different approaches, but the key thing is if we don't start and we don't make it important to identify and understand our core values, and then as a team or organization, the core values of the team and then the core values of the organization, we're creating a problem for ourselves. And Anton, something you said I think is really good, that sometimes the buy-in on the part of different aspects of the or different people of the team may not be in determining the core value, but how do we execute? How do we demonstrate those core values? And when we allow the team to do that, again, we get buy-in for non-self-managed team members to be able to say, okay, I agree with that, and this is how I would go about demonstrating that value. And when we do that, that changes, it affects motivation. Part of the problem we see in teams today is a lack of engagement. It's really a huge problem. And in part, that's because they don't share the values. And everything is an effort to do anything because we have different values. And that is a challenge. And in fact, in some cases, that conflict can create a situation that's unresolvable within that team or within that organization, and better to address it and understand it rather than create a problem for the team and for the individual. And part of what Anton and I talk about a lot is to do with stress. Having conflicted core values in your life on a regular basis will create stress levels that are just out of this world. They will, if you're always in question if you should be doing something, boy, your stress meter should go right off the charts with that, because we want to operate within those values and stay true to them. It's just the nature of how we're made.
Yeah, stress is created whether we have a core value set and then we go against it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Constantly going against it, kind of what you're talking about, or it's inability to make effective decisions because you don't have those guiding principles. That's a whole other decision fatigue, right? Decisions become pretty easily if you give me a roadmap and I have, basically choices because of those preset values. But if I don't, there's an infinite possibility of outcomes, and every time you're telling me I have to make a decision, I have to run through all those possibilities. It becomes really taxing on their brain and our body and our soul. So it's really important. I'm going to say something that may be controversial or argumentative, but core values are less important in what we call them than how we execute them. Right? Like a lot of times I see companies trying to come in and have the perfect word, the perfect sentence, and that helps with execution. That's why it's important to do it, go through the exercises. But I'm going to argue that you can have the not perfect word, the not perfect sentence or whatever, but the general meaning of it is really great and people believe in it, and it hits them in their heart, hits them in their head, and it influences them to do better, to live that way. And that's what we have to remember is how do we constantly bring it to life? How do we constantly reinforce it? How do we constantly get people to get on board behind it? But at the same time, how do we sift through the people and get rid of those that don't embody it? Because not everybody will. And as Kevin said, sometimes it's for their good, sometimes it's for the company good, but we need people to align to it, as Karen said earlier. So what do you tie into those core values? Is your compensation package tied into core values, right? Are you paying people based on those core values? Are other rewards tied into them? Is your one-on-one coaching tied into them? Everything should be leading up back to the top of those core values. And if you haven't set that up as a company, if you haven't set it up as a team, it's not going to stick. That's the thing. You can have the best person, the best leadership development person in the world come in and set up the perfect words and perfect sentences. But if they're not lived every single day because not everything ties back into them, it's going to be worthless after time.
Yes. Welcome, Dorcas. Glad to have you from Kenya. Look forward to your comments and questions as well. And one kind of back up and get a bigger picture. The triad or trilogy of what is essential about life, about work, has to do with vision, mission, and values. And those are there for a reason. And if you don't have all three, you're going to, again, set yourself up for conflict. You're going to have problems with people not having clear direction and guidance. And when you don't have those elements in place well, then you have people either driven in the wrong direction, and therefore you have to always correct and adjust them and deal with them, or you have to always help them find where that fits and things like that. Whereas if you have those pieces clear, then you are allowing people room. You've given them a set of parameters, and then you can let them go to you do and be what they're good at. Why you brought them on board, because you got the parameters established in your vision, mission, and values. And from there, everything else is subject to creativity and initiative and innovation and so on. Welcome, Lori. Glad to have you. It's been a long time seeing you, but always glad to have you. And Lori has a comment. It says, knowing your own values is so important. Job satisfaction is tied to your values. If your values are not aligned with your role, manager, or company, it will result in misalignment. Yes, so true, Lori. And unfortunately, I think that is the situation we see a lot of people in currently, is that misalignment and the resulting confusion, conflict, even down to communication. We can say a sentence or a phrase And in the context of our values, it may make sense. But in the absence of that context, then what happens is there creates miscommunication, confusion, even in making that statement or phrase.
No, it's. I'll tell you from my experience, it's really hard to lead people without values. Like it is so challenging, um, because there's no, like, you use the word moral compass. It's not very set. It might exist in there somewhere, but it's not very set. It's not very guiding, and it's hard for you to kind of piggyback on that as a leader to be able to get them from point A to point B. So it is so key. And then, Lori, I know you do, you work with people on their strengths, using UMAP and things like that. If they don't have values, it's hard to put their strengths to purpose, right? It's hard to attach that superpower that really ignites those strengths and helps them to grow and continue to be better within them.
Yeah, and quite often our values reflect in our strengths, and they're tied together, and understanding them and using them become more practical when we understand the values that they're originated from. Karen has a question for us, Anton. How would you handle a situation when the ownership does not share the same core values with the employees? Ownership looks for bottom line only in the financial standpoint. All right, go for it.
Yeah, it comes back to beliefs, right? They don't have a belief. In order to do that, we have to recreate an experience through experience, or with leadership, it's more stories, right? We need a workshop. They need a leadership workshop, and that'd be the very first thing I would ask is, when was the last time these leaders went through leadership development, not on an individual level, but as a team, right? When was the last time there's alignment created? When was the last time they saw some research studies that showed, here's what the data says about performance, right? Bottom line is impacted by these in this way. And there's many companies out there that's all they do is they just spend time on research. And yes, it costs money and you have to spend some money on it. Or you hire somebody like a coach, like Kevin is a great leadership coach, and they bring that research with them and they say, here's real life case studies of this team implemented this and this is what it did to performance, because these people are numbers driven. So we need to give them some numbers, not just what they would call fluff. It's not fluff, but they would call it that if we didn't back it up with data. So that'd be my approach with them, as a leadership workshop backed up by data with case studies of companies in similar situations, similar industry, whatever it may be, that had great growth because of setting core values.
Well, and I get real simple on this one. And this is a challenge that is hard because when we have a job and we're accustomed to the economic value and everything, it's hard to make choices. But if the core values are in contradiction to each other, especially on an essential level, it may be time as an employee to consider this is not the place you need to be. And the reason for that is you're going to be in conflict on a regular basis. You can guarantee that, especially if their essential value is about making money over everything else. If you're not a money driven person, you're going to be in conflict, and your stress levels are going to be out the roof because you're always in conflict with your core values. So if there is that conflict, you have to ask yourself, is this something that I need to put myself through on a regular basis? Especially if, like Anton said, the company has gone through some steps to really talk about it and give experiential opportunity with the core values to find out if maybe there's unclarity or it's misunderstood. But if there is indeed a real conflict between core values, it may be time to consider this is not the place for me, because ultimately, I don't care how good the money is. I don't care how good the benefits are. There will be a point you'll look at it and go, this is not worth it. Problem is, if you wait too long, it makes it harder because you're into that situation and your lifestyle and your other experiences, priorities are set accordingly. So better if there is that conflict and you understand it early on, or even before you hire on with the company, better to not put yourself in that situation, because it can create some real challenges and stress. Like, it's hard to describe. I mean, we're talking just day to day, constant grind stress. If you're conflicted in values with the company or team you're on, real problem there.
I don't know if Lori's still on or
Yeah.
not, but Lori, we got to get you as a guest. I know that you would have a lot of value to offer an audience, and living and working within our strength is obviously a big piece of human sustainability. So if you are still listening, we got to get you on.
Consider yourself invited. And Lori makes a comment a few moments ago that companies list values but not really actually practice them. It is important to research and ask good questions during the interview process. That is, again, another challenge, is that we have companies that have this nice vision, mission, value statement on the wall somewhere, but it practically has no effect on day-to-day function and operation. And that is certainly a challenge that we have to be careful with. Again, we're going to experience challenges. That's normal. But if it's a day-to-day, every day, every moment thing, that's a bad place to be. Welcome, Rick. Glad to have you. And Rick has a comment. Says you may be able to get a read on a person's moral compass during an interview, probably going to better feel during a probation period. Yeah. Anton, your thoughts on that one?
Yeah, combining both of those together, right? Lori's comment and Rick's comment, they're coming from two different ends, right? One is the company understanding the person's personal values to see if they're a good fit for their values. The other one is the person understanding the company's personal values to see if, the company's values to see if they're good for their personal values. And I feel like we've gotten a little bit better at the company looking at the person and their values, right? We've used all sorts of psychology and all sorts of different interviewing processes to get better at that. Where I think we're not as good at is the person reading the company, right? And I just look at, what does the company do to read the person? It's the way we ask questions in interviews.
Mm-hmm.
Usually it's, tell me about a time where X happened. What did you do? What was the outcome, right? That's usually the standard question that picks that specific value. And it's kind of easy to fake it. Yes, you can do it. But if you can read people, you can usually see if they're being real or not. But we're not doing that the other way around. So I would reverse that as a person doing the, being an interviewee. And I would say, to a leader that's doing the interview, I would say, tell me about a time where you did this. What happened? Or when this happened, what did you do? Right? How did you handle that employee? How did you handle that customer? How did you handle that situation? And read them on it. Because a lot of times we come in with questions of like, well, what does your PTO policy look like? What is your reward stuff? And that's all good and dandy. I get that. We need to know that. But you need to ask and pry to see how are they putting the values they have on their webpage into life. And questions like that is what's going to help you to do it.
Well, and as you say that, Anton, I think of the book Creative Followership with Jimmy Collins. And one of the things he talks about in there is, really, as a potential employee, we want to make it a priority to interview who we will be working with. And our manager, boss, whatever the term, ask for an opportunity to interview them and to ask questions like this. In this kind of situation, what has happened in the past? Don't be afraid to challenge, because, again, you're entering into a relationship with a job. And if it's not a good fit, you're going to pay a price. And it will be a painful price. And it goes back to one of the key things, is it creates a situation where you have unmanageable stress and you don't recover. You don't get back into the green zone, if you will. Anton and I have a graphic that shows the stress levels and how you go up higher stress for higher motivation and then recover and so on. But the goal is you got to get back in the green zone to recover. And if you're in a situation where you're conflicted over core values, that's going to be really hard to do on a regular basis. And that's something you need to be able to do on a regular basis. So let's see. Z's got a question. Says, how you manage a situation where what is written from mission, vision, and values are great, but what you are experiencing and feeling is not the same. There's a period where one questions if I'm not aligned with them, and the problem is within me. If I'm understanding your question, Z, is, how do we deal with it if we think there is a conflict? And I would say, first of all, and this is just a good practice as an individual and especially as a leader, before you look for other causes, look internally. Really do introspection and say, okay, first of all, is there a misalignment? Do I have a core value here that's being violated, or am I just misunderstanding? And if it's something that's really critical, ask, is my core value wrong? Like Anton said, we don't do wholesale changes regularly on core values, but there are times as part of growth that we may say, this core value of mine was, as I understood at the time, made sense, but now my values have shifted, and that's part of growth and maturity. And so, yes, if you come up against another core value and you go, okay, this is not my core value, but could it be or should it be? It's worth considering, because that's part of how we grow. And I always like when people come to me and challenge me on a core value as much as anything, because it's good for me. Is that core value still where I'm at in my walk and growth, or is it changing? Is it tweaked? Is it time to adjust it? I have this core value and I've executed it in certain fashion, but now how I execute that core values changed or should change. So yeah, if you come up against that in a company, Z, it's worth considering first, is there something to learn from there and grow from it? If not, then you have to ask the question, is it bad enough that I need to consider finding a different organization, team, or whatever with more and better aligned values? Anton, your thought on that one?
I mean, the first part, how to manage the situation, right? It's feedback. Sometimes we can't give feedback ourselves to our leaders because they may not be open to that. But we do need to understand, are these leaders willing to change? Are they willing to hear, right? And it's just a misalignment issue because they're unaware, or these are just bad leaders that are consciously doing this. They're aware, but they just don't care, right? And my practical approach would be like a pulse check. Somehow coming to the leadership team and making it palatable for them, where it's not like, hey, I feel like our leadership is not doing the right thing, so we need to ask the teams if they are. No, we have to say, hey, we need to check in with the health of the team. We need to see how people are doing. I feel like we haven't checked in on a global way, meaning like the entire company or the entire, department, however big you want to go. I usually prefer to go big, depending on where the issue is, right? What level of leadership is the issue at? Is it the C-level? We probably need to do a full company, pulse check survey. If it's departmental, then we need to do a departmental pulse check survey. But presenting it in a way that it's not attacking the leader, because they're not going to want to do that if they feel like it's about them. But somehow positioning a question about there is the company performing in alignment with what values we're, presenting out there, right? What we have on the webpage, what we talk to people about, and then gathering data. I'm always going to come back to data as much as I can when I'm talking about leaders, because they need to see the numbers. They need to see the proof. It's not just anecdotal. It's like, hey, we had 65% of our people responded that we're not aligned to X value or this value. And that would be my way of managing it. Now, on a personal level, understanding, like I would sit down with a leader and say, hey, what do these values mean? Right. And I don't mean that like in a sentence like we have them written. What do they mean on everyday actions that we execute within our department? And have them run through that in a one-on-one with you and see if it aligns. Right. And you get clarity from that, whether it's you or it's them, because of the way they're interpreting and the way that they're saying it. And I'm not saying you're there to teach them what the right way or wrong way is, but you're just there to really understand how they see them versus just a statement. It becomes, what do they see that in everyday life?
Well, and one thing I remind anyone that as we deal with people, we need to take a servant leader approach. And that servant leader approach, especially dealing with other leadership, is not to come at them and hit them in the face with, well, that's stupid, or, why in the world did you do that? That kind of approach. It's more of a respectful approach of making an appeal. Come to them and say, well, I'm confused because, this is what is stated, but this is what I observe. Help me understand. And rather than I'm going to change your mind because it's a bad idea, whatever. So use the approach, the principle of appeal as a servant leader in any situation if you need to challenge that situation. It will come across better and be more effective in the end, and more likely to find, if there is common ground, what that common ground is, and not destroy a relationship. Because part of any of this kind of thing is about relationship, because we have to function on a relational level. We can't just function robotically. Lori's still around. That's good, Lori. And she makes the comment, you need to identify your core values that are non-negotiable deal breakers. See, I think that's where we have a lot of problem, is there a lot of people don't know what are those things, or they don't identify those things in their life ahead of time, and get in a situation where that one of those core values is challenged. And at that point, you're not given time to consider it, to be able to communicate and talk it through. And all of a sudden, there is a huge conflict that you have to deal with. So, yes, it is so important. We have to know what are those things that we will not negotiate. One of those for me is that I will not use people, period. And if that's what it takes to get the project done, the assignment done, the task completed, I'm not the fit for that job. I can't do that to people. I can't use them. And so, yeah. So identify your deal breaker, non-negotiable ones is very important. Let's see. Jeremy's got it. Or did you want to comment on that, Anton?
Yeah, I mean, just something I would say, and I hope I don't rub anybody the wrong way. This is not an on and off switch. As much as many people say identify your deal breaker and live that way, somebody that's going from never having lived that way to trying to be that way, you're not just going to go flip a light switch on. It's going to be that way. It's a muscle. You train it, right? It's a resilience thing that you need to build up and get to a point where maybe it starts with small things and then it builds up into bigger things. You truly have to train yourself to be able to walk away from a situation, irrelevant of consequences, if it breaks that deal breaker core value. But it's not easy. It's so freaking hard, folks. Like I don't want to make it seem like it's just a piece of cake. So start small. Maybe you say, you know what? Maybe within my family first. I think if you're, especially as a parent, that's the easiest one to me personally, is I can set some core values and follow through on them on the family front more than on a professional front first. But find areas in your life where you practice that deal breaker, right? And then you expand it out to eventually apply it to everything. But just don't feel bad if that's not natural for you to just be like, they make it seem like you can just walk away and do this. No, it's hard for everybody. Some people built the muscle up stronger.
Well, and one thing to understand, establishing core values is not a once and done event. It is a lifelong process, and it involves living and growing. And that's where you begin to tweak. You learn better how to communicate the core values. And over time, what may start out is what we think of as a core value that's a non-negotiable. Over time, we may realize that we need to reprioritize that, whether it's important but not a deal breaker. That may, as we grow over time, become a challenge. Let's see. Jeremy has a comment. I learned covering the business's core values when doing an interview assists both the business as well as those who are looking to be a part of the team to establish if their synergies are aligned, which can then develop into a strong team. However, for it to happen, it has to be as a collective core value. Indeed, again, but what Anton mentioned is not just the agreement with the phrase, but how do we live it out? Anton, thoughts on?
No, you're spot off. Spot on. I mean, it's synergies. I like the word synergies. I know it was a buzzword for a long time. People don't love it. I love it. Right? Mm-hmm. It's where what creates the sum individual or the team. And the synergistic team is greater than the sum of its individual parts. It takes time. It's hard. Like, and I think it was Karen that mentioned about leaders that only looking at financials, right? And they don't see the value behind that, and that becomes even harder. But this can be done without leadership, right? How much time does that team spend together talking about this stuff? And you don't have to do that in formal settings. You can do it in lunchtime breaks. You can do it in after school activities, after work activities, where you're getting together and you discuss and you get to know each other, what's important. So it's tough, but it's worth it for sure.
Well, and now that you mention it, another way to identify and understand core values is a team building effort where you go out and do something together as a team, but it's a challenging situation. For example, you take on a community service project that you're going to sweat and work hard and struggle together. In that setting, people's core values come out. And so as a team, get out and get together and attack a project together that's going to cause everyone to be real. Part of the challenge with core values is sometimes we're embarrassed that we have a core value and we don't want to own it. But if you get out and you sweat and work hard together and struggle together, your core values come out. And you'll find out if there's a conflict when you're doing a project and people's different approaches to how to get that project accomplished outside of work, mind you, then we will find out real quick if our core values are conflicting or not, or if we've identified them. And so it's a good way to do that is to get out and sweat together and work on something outside of work, because people are going to be more real outside of work when they don't feel like their job's on the line or create a problem with a coworker or whatever. See, Lori makes.
I would add real quick, Kevin, to that point, just volunteer work as teams. A lot of times core values tie into helping something or society, humanity, whatever it may be, but you don't see that company ever going outside of what pays them money to make that happen. And you're looking at it as a team member going like, yeah, do you really care? Or are you just trying to say that just so you get more money for it? So I think as leaders or even organizing that as teams is going and volunteering time. And I think that's one of the best things to reinforce some of the core values that the companies have.
Very good. Lori makes comment. You're right, Kevin, regarding how someone needs to structure their communication when discussing issues. You have to give management the benefit of being unaware of their actions, although that shouldn't be an excuse. again, our approach in dealing with conflict or disagreement, a lot of it's about mindset and giving benefit of the doubt, and also not trying to be right just because we feel like we got to be right. It comes down to a point of let's talk this through. I want to appeal to your consideration, your whatever, rather than demanding you got to change this because something wrong. That very rarely accomplishes anything. Lori makes another comment that great point, Anton. It takes time to identify professional core values, uh, and yeah, and there has to be a purpose to being purposeful in working on this. And this is not, again, not something we do one time and we're done. If you do that, you're going to lose priority. You're going to lose the value of those values and the impact. Whereas if you visit them on a regular basis, you gain understanding and you identify potential conflict.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Lori has another comment. Lori, we definitely need to get you on as a guest sometime. Let's get with Anton or myself and figure out when we can make that happen. There are some companies that allow employees 8 hours of volunteer time with charity of their choosing. This honors the employee's values. In fact, I haven't heard recently, but at one point, one core value of Timberland Corporation was that they actually, along with their vacation time that they gave their employees, they also would pay them 2 weeks a year to volunteer and perform with their charity or community group, whatever, as part of their culture, and very impactful. And they lived Timberland lived it also, because I encountered them working with Skills USA, the student organization, and one year they actually donated 750 pair of boots to volunteers that did community service as part of the Skills USA conference. And so, yeah, there are companies that do that, and I think that's a really good investment into their people.
I mean, it's a question that every leader should ask themselves. Are my people proud to work here? Right? Like, it's a very simple way to analyze and see, are your core values sticking? Are they actually, are we living them on a regular basis? And that's one great way of doing that. But 8 hours, I love that policy. The company that I work for does that. But the previous point, how hard the core values are to set, ties into the next point. It's a challenge to even go through the exercise of setting them, like defining them, I should say, right? Defining, or getting people on board to even do that and participate. But that's really not the hard part. The hard part, as I was said earlier, is how do we tie everything else that we do back into those values, right? Our volunteer time, where we donate money, where we do all those things. And these are multi-year projects, folks. Like, because this is culture. This becomes culture. And somebody that comes in and thinks they can change culture in a few workshops are crazy. You can define you want your culture to be in a few workshops, but you're not going to change culture. Culture just truly, I don't see culture really shifting under 2 years. I think it's a minimum of a 2-year cycle to truly get the culture to change, to set. And then you have to feed it. Like, you can't, it's an ongoing, never ending process, and core values are at the foundation of that.
Well, and that's the reason we're even talking about this. Establishing core values along with your vision and mission set the tone for your entire culture, or it should. If it's not, that's its own problem. If you got your vision, mission, values on the wall, but what your organization doesn't reflect it, that's a problem and should be addressed and questioned. Because if you look at organizations, Anton, you mentioned Ritz-Carlton earlier, their value on customer service is such that they invest in having that built into everybody all the time at every level. And they really are very purposeful in it. If you ever, it's a good learning time to check into Ritz-Carlton and their values, vision, mission, values in regards to service to their clients. And that's a company that does it very well. So values. First question is, have you understood or established or recognized your own values? If you don't, you're going to be tossed around and you're going to be conflicted. High stress over it. Second question is, if you've established, what are they and do they align in your situation? And this is not just work. This is everywhere. And if you've done this well, this drives your entire life. And you have to check, is there alignment with your values? And we as parents, worst thing we can do is say we have a certain value, but we don't live it and demonstrate it. Talking about making it hard for your family, your children, that's a big one, very big one. So do you have values, and can you communicate them, and how do they align? Anton, closing thoughts?
I mean, you hit it across the board. I mean, that's the truth. I'm just going to reiterate, how do you continue to embody those values? How do you continue to build everything around them is more important than the value, how you defined it. Right. So don't set them and forget them. You have to keep reinforcing, right? I think that's the right word to choose there. Is you have to keep reinforcing those values in every single action and every single outcome. And don't forget to tie pay into it. Like that's not just pay, but rewards, total rewards into it. Because if you don't, you're not really putting your money where your mouth is. And then people are going to see through the BS. They're going to see that this is just an exercise of futility, and we're doing this to look good. We're doing this to, make the leadership look good, but we're not really living this every single day. So make sure you're living that. And as a person, if you've set your values and your values don't align every day with what you're doing, build that muscle of deal breaker muscle and walk away from those situations. Nobody said it has to be tomorrow, but build a plan to walk away in the right time and start moving towards that execution as soon as you can.
Very good. Well, thank you, everyone. Great input from everyone in the audience. So much appreciate y'all being here. And we'll be back next Tuesday, 8 a.m. Eastern, with our next topic. And we'll be getting that out much sooner this week so that you can set aside time to join us. Look forward to it. So God bless. Have an amazing rest of your week, and look forward to seeing you guys back next Tuesday. Take care, everyone. Bye now.